Network to introduce today's speaker.
It's my honor to introduce Chloe Taft Kang as our keynote speaker today, as we kick off our Women's Network Weekend, Inspiring Teachers, a celebration of excellence in education. I know that Chloe, as a student here, inspired us as teachers, and now she herself is a brilliant and inspiring teacher. Dr. Taft Kang taught urban studies as a Mellon postdoctoral associate in Integrated Humanities Department at Yale, and most recently served as a lecturer in U.S. history at Lake Forest College, where she has taught the undergraduate history seminar, Inequality and Reform, United States, 1865 to 1920. She is the author of From Steel to Slots, Casino Capitalism in the Post-Industrial City. Her writing has appeared in the Journal of Planning History, The American Scholar, Next City, and Rust Belt Chicago, and Anthology. She is a graduate of Williams College, where she earned her BA degree in American Studies and Sociology. She received her PhD in American Studies at Yale University in 2014. Chloe came to St. Andrews from Erie Day School in Erie, Pennsylvania. Her teachers in middle school uniformly described her as the most outstanding scholar, leader, and citizen in the school's history, a girl respected by every student within the school. One of Chloe's exemplars was her grandfather, who had the opportunity to pursue his education in the years following the Great Depression. She watched her grandfather sponsor students at a local college, donate books to university libraries, and thereby open doors of educational opportunity he so cherished as an undergraduate. From her grandfather, Chloe learned to embrace educational opportunity and to expand such opportunity as widely and generously as possible. She brought that spirit of engagement and generosity to St. Andrews, establishing herself quickly as one of the most brilliant, inspiring, and engaged students in her class. Here is how St. Andrews described Chloe in one letter written to accompany her selection as a News Journal academic all-star. Chloe Taft's greatest strength is a rare combination of innate intellectual power and humility. Chloe has long taken her place as the top student in her class. However, it is Chloe's genuine curiosity, her purposeful dedication to thorough inquisition, and her tireless work ethic, her love for the discovery of new ideas that inspire her teachers and peers. Chloe is a student who simply and sincerely and humbly loves the act of learning. In turn, she takes risks and is engaged in the act of learning 24 hours a day. During her career here, Chloe was a member of the 2000 State Championship tennis team, coached by Women's Network Workshop leader this year, Hardy Gieske. State champion at first doubles in tennis, varsity field hockey, and varsity squash. She was a drummer in the jazz band and the recipient each year of the King Prize, given to the student with the best academic record in her form. We are so happy to welcome you back to St. Andrews, Chloe.
You know, if I look at it now, I look at it from a point of view other than a young person. Although, to a young person, what is the American dream? For me, it was to be able to continue working until I got a pension, and then have a house and have enough money to keep on going and going to places and do things and enjoy myself and spend some time traveling and have some money in my pocket and to not worry that I'm not going to have benefits or health care. As things happen, that American dream changes. It changes pretty much on a monthly basis now the way things are going. To have that vision of the American dream as security, safety, there's not so much the opportunity for that anymore. I considered being a steelworker a good job because I knew every day when I would go into work there'd be something for me to do. I would get a fair day's pay. It was dangerous, yeah. It was risky, yeah. There were health hazards, yeah, but I had a job. And I was doing something not just for myself, but for the company and the economy and the country. And the things that I was doing were building things. I kept the machines that made the steel that built the country and the world going. So I had something. When you leave that, then you don't have anything anymore. It's like you start playing football, and then you're playing against a bunch of guys that might be a little bigger than you. But yeah, you're smart enough, you can dodge them and zigzag. And then you find out that, wait, they got 12 guys on the field and we only have 10. Now wait, this game's getting a little harder. Now their guys are getting bigger and we're getting smaller. And it's like, well, hang on now. They got 25 coaches on the sideline, and we got old Ben over there who used to play when he was in college. And the resources that you thought you had all of a sudden are drying up and disappearing. And you still got to play the game. So there goes that whole game plan, and then what do? Arnold Strong, former steelworker, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
I want to start by thanking Jamie for doing that reading, and also thanking Elizabeth for the most generous introduction I've ever received, and thanking her for the invitation to come here today. It's really a special invitation to be here and to be able to give a chapel talk to all of you. Before I get to the interview you just heard, I also just want to say what an amazing experience it is to be part of the community of educators that have come out of St. Andrews. So when I was looking through the list of people who are going to be here this weekend, we had Louisa Zent, class of 78, who was my freshman year advisor. Hardy Giesky, class of 92, who was my tennis coach here at St. Andrews and took us to 2 state championship titles. 3 state championship titles. Obviously my peers around the class of 2001. And then Libby Lakeman, class of 2012, who was actually a student in the first seminar I taught at Lake Forest College. And if she's here already, I want to thank her for her patience and the mess that class was, and for her dedication as a student in it. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about the experience of researching my book From Steel to Slots, which is what the interview you just heard came from. Broadly speaking, it's a community study of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is a city just outside of Philadelphia, not too far from here. Writing this book was really more to me, it was more than about producing knowledge, but it was really a learning process in itself. So as a kid, I went to Bethlehem a couple times a year to visit my grandparents. It's a city of 75,000 and it had 2 claims to fame. First, the little town of Bethlehem was known for its Christmas decorations around the holidays. And second, it was the headquarters year-round of the Bethlehem Steel Corporation, which since its founding in the late 19th century, became the 2nd largest steel maker in the world. And this was the company for which my grandfather, a mechanical engineer, had moved his family to Bethlehem in the 1960s. And here he is, pictured with his department. In 2009, several years after my grandfather had passed away and my grandmother had moved away, I returned to Bethlehem, this time as a graduate student. This was the research site through which I was going to earn my academic credentials, my PhD in American Studies. The big question that brought me back was, how did a former industrial community make sense of massive economic change? Something that seemed most perfectly represented by the closure in the late 1990s of the Bethlehem steel plant and the opening 10 years later of an industrial-themed casino on the site of the former ore yard. Here was a town that went from an economy based on manufacturing to one based on service, entertainment, and finance. So in addition to looking at local archives, the key component of my research was ethnographic. Ethnography is a term that's generally associated with the field of cultural anthropology. It's the in-depth study and interpretation of everyday life, culture, and meaning-making. This meant I lived in the community full-time for 6 months and made frequent visits over the course of several years. I attended local festivals, city council meetings, historic preservation society get-togethers, and generally just kind of hung around town. And I interviewed dozens of people, including Arnold. Ethnography as a method requires some discomfort. It means learning as one goes and allowing key research questions, themes, and analyses to emerge through one's local interactions. Indeed, though I went to study the lived experience of economic transition, I found that learning is itself a lived experience, and it's a messy, nuanced, and sometimes uneasy one. One of the most important lessons I learned was about the ways in which education expands far beyond formal institutions, beyond test scores and diplomas. So I want to begin by introducing you to two other men I interviewed, Chuck, a former steelworker, and Nicholas, a young casino dealer. They seem to perfectly represent the story of economic transition in Bethlehem and in the American Rust Belt more generally. But I found they actually had a lot in common. And here, as with Arnold, I'm using pseudonyms to protect their privacy. Chuck is a brusque but talkative 70-year-old. He was a fourth-generation steelworker whose great-grandfather immigrated from what is now Slovakia in 1885 to work at the Steel, as the company was called locally. The plant was a major draw for immigrants from Europe and later from Mexico and Puerto Rico. Its networks of plants, mines, and shipyards extended across the nation and across the globe. At its peak during World War II, the Bethlehem plant alone employed more than 30,000 people. Chuck worked at the Steel from 1965 to 1997. I interviewed him early in my research, and as we set up our meeting over the phone, he clearly was testing my knowledge of the local area by mentioning landmarks on the way to his house. At the time, I wasn't familiar with Gus's, a Greek restaurant, or Five Corners, a particularly confusing intersection. He quickly ascertained that although my grandfather had worked at the Steel, I was not from Bethlehem. Over the course of my research, I saw Chuck regularly around town. And he was alternately generous with his time and his insights, or gruff and standoffish. He had a way of rightly letting me know that he and other longtime residents were the experts on life in Bethlehem, not me with my fancy university credentials. Chuck didn't go to college, because when he graduated from high school in 1965, you didn't need to. This is a chart from a recent New York Times article that just shows you the percentage of American adults with a four-year college degree. And you can see in the 1960s, it's the vast majority, although it's been going down since. Chuck had steady wages, robust benefits, and union protections that meant for many steelworkers, they could afford to buy a house and a car and go on vacation. Spouses, if they chose, could stay home and take care of the children. And one of the proudest achievements of this new middle class, they could afford to send those children to college for the first time. As the reading we opened with made clear, all of that stability, security, and predictability was swept away with the corporation's long, slow decline after the 1970s in a wave of deindustrialization that impacted manufacturing communities across the country. With the closure of the local plant in 1998 and the eventual bankruptcy of the Bethlehem Steel Corporation in 2003, workers lost their pensions and health care, benefits that had been made spending decades doing grueling and dangerous work seem worth it. Many former steelworkers couldn't find new jobs, especially if they were near retirement age already. Wives went back to work, often more readily employable in the growing service and healthcare economies. The majority of the steel plant sat vacant for a decade. Then, with the legalization of casinos in Pennsylvania, a new business opened in 2009 on the site of the former ore yard. And here you can see they've even incorporated the former ore bridge, original to the site, into the new design. The local community college, housed in the former Bethlehem Steel office building just down the street, opened a casino trading school. It offers classes in dealing blackjack, roulette, and other games to students eager to find work at the new casino, including those who had lost manufacturing jobs and qualified for government funding for retraining. The classrooms where potential dealers train are scattered with felt tables instead of desks. One day I sat in on about 20 minutes of a craps lesson, the dice game. that you see pictured here. Instructors told me crafts attracts their brightest students. Here's what I wrote in my field notes that night. It's like another language, talking about the horn, the high horn, the world, the C and E. These are all names of bets with different odds. Everyone seems to have trouble calculating, but no one was taking notes. The math is all about coming up with tricks to calculate payouts in your head. Sometimes they are keys in the textbook. Sometimes they're personal tricks. And it was at the dealer school that I met Nicholas, a young man in his early 20s. Nicholas grew up in the shadow of the steel plant where his grandfather was a steelworker. He had dreams of becoming a skilled carpenter, but with the recession in 2008, he couldn't find an internship with a builder to complete the requirements for his associate's degree. Nicholas saw dealing as a way station to earn a living until the economy picked back up and people started building homes again. At least dealing blackjack and craps, he told me, let him work with his hands. When I talked to Nicholas a year later, he had more fully embraced his new career path and had abandoned those earlier plans. As in the classroom, I felt at times during our conversation that he was speaking a foreign language when he described his daily work. Neither Chuck nor Nicholas had what from our seats we might call a traditional higher education, nor did they have the opportunity for one. But I would never characterize them as uneducated. What I want to focus on in the rest of my talk is that there are multiple ways of knowing and of learning. As a research method, conducting interviews is steeped in uncomfortable power dynamics. Going to Bethlehem meant that I had to be clear that I was not there to extract information from research subjects for my own benefit to earn my degree, though of course on some level this was true. Indeed, I needed to consciously disrupt the hierarchies of knowledge that the university and other formal institutions of education instill. This was not about simply acquiring knowledge. It was a give and take, a reciprocal relationship, where learning took unexpected forms, and those I spoke with were part of a conversation, not subjects to interrogate. Chuck understood this from the beginning. As president of the Steelworkers Archives, a group of retired steelworkers trying to preserve their proud history, he saw in me a recruit. You can become a paying member, he told me, adding, and you probably will, because you're going to feel guilty after a while talking to all of these people. And in that uneasy position of ethnographer, of course I did. I want to briefly show you 3 other examples of some lessons I learned in Bethlehem, beginning with an ABC lesson. This area on the map is Northampton Heights, a racially and ethnically mixed working class neighborhood that was surrounded entirely by the steel plant. In 1965, the entire area was declared blighted. This was during the peak of federally funded urban renewal, where the federal government would help pay cities to tear down old neighborhoods and rebuild. An inspection that was performed explicitly to meet the requirements to get this funding found evidence in the Heights of overcrowding, lack of toilets, fire code violation, lack of electricity or heat. The steel company expressed interest in the site, purchased the 280 homes, and by 1968 raised the Heights to make room for a new basic oxygen furnace to modernize its steel production. Many residents appreciated the cash to move out of their homes and into more prosperous neighborhoods or to the suburbs. In exchange, the steel promised that the updated technology would increase job stability in the decades to come. But Frank, a retired teacher in his late 70s who I spoke with, just shook his head. This is a photograph that Frank brought to our interview. He explained that while certain blocks of the Heights were falling into disrepair, by 1965, the majority comprised well-maintained and respectable housing and businesses. Frank went on to describe to me his 3-story brick house on 4th Street with fondness. He told me details of stained glass windows, a walk-in closet, an enclosed back porch, like a realtor doing a showing of his own childhood. Frank's steelworker father was the son of Slovenian immigrants who bought the home in the early 20th century, shortly after it was built. His father refused to leave when they condemned it in the 1960s until they shut off the water and electricity. Frank said, when they were tearing that house down, they had the steel ball to knock it. It just kept bouncing off the wall. The wall would not crumble. Implicitly echoing the perceived shift from a secure past to a less stable economic future, he added with a laugh, "They did that to my house now, it would fall apart right away." I want to play you a short clip from this interview to give you a sense of how this landscape is narrated. So Frank began to point out various establishments to me on this photo.
Right here in the corner was a hotel, the Sequoia Hotel. And this was Ambleside Street. This was Bessemer, this was Carbon, this was Diamond, and this was Harry. They were all connected with coal or iron, so all the industries. And then you had 3rd Street, and 2nd Street, and Front Street. And this is that whole area that was all taken over by the big steel, this whole big area. Now my house would have been right here.
So Frank is not alone in feeling the persistent presence of this neighborhood's erasure. The names of those 5 cross streets that you just heard him say, Anthracite, Bessemer, Carbon, Diamond, and Emory, formed a mantra that men and women who lived or worked in this area before it vanished repeated to me over and over to invoke an earlier time. Their memory of the 5 streets, so closely aligned with the steel company, draws a different kind of map, a map of a period of their lives swept away. Which brings us to a geography lesson. Here I'm going to play a piece of another interview, this one with a former supervisor at the steel, who took me on a driving tour of that same area of the plant. Midway through our 3-hour excursion, Ted pointed his blue minivan east, past the casino, towards the site of his old office on the far end of the plant. Turning into what had been raised and partially rebuilt as an industrial park, Ted's gestures quickened and he leaned over the steering wheel to narrate the landscape as we drove.
Several streets. This is where you need the turnover removal. They ripped everything in those days. Not absolutely that way, but this way. There used to be Anthracite Street, Bessemer, Carbon, Diamond, and Emory Street. I still remember. Now this was Bessemer Street. And we used to also have a plant gate here at one time.
So I like to play those 2 clips together because you can really hear the echoes of this haunted landscape. Ted's recollections as he continued to talk jump seamlessly from decade to decade. The traces of the Bessemer Street gate to the plant that he mentioned evoked a time when thousands of workers entered and left during shift changes, crowding the streets to a standstill. His commentary as we drove through this portion of the plant mapped memory onto place in a way that brought past chronology into present experience. Just beyond the industrial park buildings, which include an architecture firm, some software developers, a number of warehouses, we reached a dirt road that was clearly a path for land raising equipment and not for blue minivans. As Ted hit the gas, he said, "I hope nobody chases us, but I gotta show you this." I had heard from others that developers had kicked explorers like us off of this portion of the plant before. But we headed east towards the rail yards, past some dump trucks, abandoned train engines, until we reached this weather-worn sign that said reserved parking. It marked this open field. "Right here was where I used to park my car," Ted said. "This was my last office." Ted got out of the car to look around, taking a moment to orient himself and piece together what this cleared land used to hold. A place, both physical and social, that was clearly designated for him. Returning to the car, Ted turned the wheel back towards the main road. He said, "I'm sure we're going to get chased. Although, geez, I just made a wrong turn, I'm sorry." It struck me then, as he's making up these excuses in his head, that what we were trespassing on was really Ted's own life. The 21 years he spent working for the steel. And judging by the fact that the minivan we rode in was full of cardboard boxes stuffed with his belongings as he lived out of a hotel, the years after that have been quite difficult for him. And so finally, a history lesson. History, both Frank and Ted made clear, is not neat. It's not even in the past. It's no surprise then that there have been contentious battles in town over who should act as tour guides for the increasing number of visitors who come and want to learn about the history of Bethlehem Steel. To the many former steelworkers who still live in town, it was obvious that they themselves are the most qualified to tell the history of the plant where they labored every day. The city's established historical society, which has specialized in giving those Christmas tours that I mentioned earlier, saw things differently, however. It saw an opportunity to expand its reach and to highlight the city's national and global importance in the context of this legacy of industrial production and now the site's post-industrial redevelopment. Its president told me that, by contrast, a lot of the steelworkers know this plant from their little corner of the world, from what they did. They see it from their perspective. To the former steelworkers, of course, this is exactly the point. We walk the walk and can do the talk, one explained. And so when the Historical Society initially considered using some former steelworkers as its tour guides, but asked them to please follow a script, the steelworkers scoffed. The potential collaboration fizzled. Instead, professional guides don yellow hard hats and lead groups through the oldest section of the steel plant, describing Bethlehem Steel's role on a world stage, providing the steel for the Golden Gate Bridge, for New York skyscrapers, for the munitions that fueled past war efforts. When I told Ted, the former supervisor, that I planned to go on one of these tours, he asked if he could come along, as he said, just to hear the lies they might have been saying. When our tour guide learned that a real steelworker was on the tour, he awkwardly fact-checked nearly all of the scripted stories about work at the plant, asking instead for Ted's opinion. So how might these encounters help us redefine what we think of as the scope of education and of teaching? Your education will and already does reach far beyond the classroom. I'll propose that education, like ethnography, is at root about empathy. You don't necessarily need to agree with a person or the policy or an institution or to sympathize with them, but to empathize is to understand where someone is coming from, why they see the world the way they do, how they make sense of things like job loss, or how they dream about their futures. As the controversy over the tour illustrates, there are multiple lived truths. And as I saw so clearly in Bethlehem, there are multiple ways of learning. Through listening, through doing, through the landscape itself, or, as Arnold said in the reading that we opened with, through the constant zigging and zagging through life's many obstacles. Chuck, the steelworker, as I mentioned, had never gone to college, but in 2011, he oversaw putting on the 10th anniversary celebration of the Steelworkers Archives. I went to Bethlehem for the all-day event that was hosted in the community college. It included driving tours of the steel site, a potluck chili lunch, a display of artifacts, including union banners and protective gear, and a number of workers and other speakers, many of whom teared up talking about the commemoration. Over the course of the day, people came and went, but there was always a full house. I navigated the folding chairs to find Chuck, who was wearing a suit for the occasion. He told me that with all the work that he and other members of the Steelworkers Archives had put into the event celebrating the steel's legacy, he felt like he had just graduated from college. You, students at a preparatory school, are by definition being prepared to go to college. For some of you, this has always been an assumption. For others, you'll be the first in your families to do so. As Chuck's words remind us, this accomplishment should not be taken lightly. Whatever you do through your educational careers, it should be meaningful in the deepest sense. Education is about investing in something that you care about. And, as at St. Andrews, it's recognizing that so much learning happens outside of the classroom. Of course, I mean on the bio barge and on the playing fields. But I also mean you learn in a really profound way by simply entering into conversation with those around you, by listening to those who are different from you. Seek out discomfort. Challenge yourselves to truly understand. Be ethnographers. In an increasingly divided culture where so many assumptions are made about people just by looking at them, this is a lesson of utter importance. The theme of this weekend is inspiring teachers, and it's almost something to take for granted that your teachers here will inspire you, as they did me in a really profound way that truly has shaped the rest of my life. But remember to look and to listen and to realize that inspiration, if you're open to it, could come from just about anywhere. Thank you.